In part one, I ended with the Jewish rabbi who felt he could believe and accept John 14:6. And the reason he could accept John 14:6, where Jesus claims that Jesus is the way, the truth, or John claims that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father except through him, is because the rabbi did not make that claim about Jesus as a historical person who lived on this earth. He made it about what that historical person represents and what he embodies. And for that Jewish rabbi, Jesus represents love. And it is only through love, the way of love, the truth of love, a life of love, that we can know and experience God. And I couldn't agree more. It's not Jesus exclusively. It is Jesus inclusively. It is what his life represents. It is what his life mirrors and reflects and embodies. There's nothing magical about the name of Jesus. In fact, the name Jesus was about as common in Jewish antiquity as John or Mary is in our culture today. It's what the name signifies. It's what the name represents. Namely, the life Jesus lived, the virtues he embodied, the values he incarnated, and the works of compassion and justice that he engaged in. This is why he was killed. And this is why God vindicated him in raising him from the dead. Vindication was at the heart of the Jewish belief in resurrection that emerged in Jewish thought around the 3rd century before the Common Era. Now, isn't it possible to live out the virtues and the values of Jesus? Isn't it possible to do the works of Jesus, engage in the deeds of Jesus, which are the works and deeds of love, compassion, justice? Is it possible to live out the virtues and the values and do the works and deeds of Jesus without actually knowing of the historical person of Jesus of Nazareth? Isn't it possible that without having knowledge of the traditions of Jesus, one can give and receive forgiveness the way Jesus taught, which was central to his teachings on our relationship with God and our relationships with each other? Isn't it possible without being knowledgeable of the specific mission of Jesus that one can care about and be committed to the very things that Jesus was committed to and cared about? Namely, doing justice for the oppressed, liberating the demonized, healing the sick and the broken, and lifting up the poor and the marginalized. Of course, it is possible. Ann Howard, who was at one time the director of the Beatitude Society, recalls how this belief in an exclusive Christianity bothered her when she was a child. And when she was about 10 years old, a group of foreign visitors came to her little Minnesota town for a weekend visit on their tour of the U.S. And several families hosted them, and her family hosted one of the Russians, a friendly man with a thick accent who went with her family to the Lutheran church on Sunday. She was sorry when the visit ended, but something that Yuri said during his visit really troubled her, Anne, and she asked her mother about it. This 10-year-old girl says to her mother, Yuri said he didn't believe in Jesus. He said he didn't even believe in God. I'm afraid he's not going to go to heaven. What's going to happen to Yuri when he dies? And her mother said to her, Christianity is not a club, Anne. It's not about who's in and out. It's about how we live. And that's good. But I would tweak it a little. I would say it's not a club. It's not about who's in or out. It's about how we love. Jesus in the Gospel of John says, this is how others will know that you are my disciples, by your love for one another. This is why Paul says, now abide these three, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. The writer of 1 John, who may have been the same writer who authored John's Gospel, says, everyone who loves is born of God and knows God, for God is love. Everyone who loves knows God and is born of God, because God is love. He goes on to say, no one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is perfected in us. John seems to be suggesting that wherever love is, God is. When you experience authentic love, you experience God. And that's true whether you realize it or not. Paul prayed in the book of Ephesians that his readers would know the breadth and length and height and depth of the love of Christ that surpasses all knowledge. Love doesn't depend on knowledge. Love requires a different kind of knowing. A mentally challenged person may never know anything about the historical Jesus, but they know love when they experience it. God is love. Christ is love. The Spirit is love. The fruit of the Spirit is love. First and foremost, love. The love of Christ can take many forms and go by many names. You know, folks, even if the biblical writers, like John, intended to teach that Jesus is the only way to God. Now, I don't believe that is what they intended to teach, but just for the sake of argument, let's assume that they did indeed intend to teach that Jesus is the only way to God. So even if they intended to teach this, surely we have evolved in our moral and spiritual consciousness in the last 2 millennia since the New Testament was written. Life evolves. Our understanding of God evolves. What love looks like and feels like, authentic love, true love. Our experience of that love evolves. It grows. What amazes me about the Bible is not that we have some culturally conditioned beliefs and practices that we would consider sexist and biased and inappropriate today. We should expect that in the Bible. What amazes me about the Bible is that we have some of the most highly inspired, enlightened, and potentially transformative texts that can be found anywhere in the world. And they are still just as relevant and beautiful and powerful today as they were then. We shouldn't consider the beliefs of the biblical writers as doctrines etched in stone and frozen in time. They are all pointers that point to a God who's magnanimous unconditional love is greater than all that we can think or imagine. Now, even in this passage in John 10, where Jesus says, I am the gate, and those who enter through me are saved. And where Jesus says, I am the good shepherd of the sheep. There is the suggestion made that Christ is not just the good shepherd of Christian sheep, but all humanity. When Jesus speaks in John, from the point of view of John and the church, John's church, it is the living Christ, the cosmic Christ, universal Christ, who is speaking. And Christ says, I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I read that to mean sheep other than the Christian fold. And he says, I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. Certainly we Christians hear the voice of Christ through the voice of Jesus. We meet Christ in the story of Jesus. We hear the voice of Christ through the voice of Jesus. But can't the voice of Christ, which is the voice of divine love, be heard through other voices? Cannot the voice of Christ be heard through the voice of Buddha or Muhammad or the voice of Gandhi or the Dalai Lama or through some other human mediator, or for that matter, through wisdom and spiritual teachers today? Surely a universal God of universal love will meet us wherever we are, in whatever religion or country or context we find ourselves in. God has to be bigger than the way so many of us were programmed to imagine God. And you don't have to be a deep theological thinker to imagine that. You just have to have the love of Christ in your heart. When it comes down to it, I mean really, when it comes down to it, if we think that we are the only ones who have the truth, if we think that it is only through our Jesus, the Jesus we inherited from our families and our churches and our traditions, passed on to us, that only through this Jesus we can know the truth about God and experience God. If we think that, then we are stuck in our ego. Our religious ego wants to cling to this idea that we are more blessed, that we are more special, that we are more exceptional than those who were not born into the Christian tradition. The Celtic scholar John Philip Newell, in his wonderful book, The Rebirthing of God, writes, he says, there is a tendency in the West to absolutize our religion. There's a tendency in Western religion, Western Christianity in particular, to make our religion absolute. And instead of viewing it, he says, instead of viewing it as a road sign that points beyond itself, we consider it a stop sign. And it becomes the destination. It becomes the end. No religion can capture God. No religion can confine God. No religion can limit God. All religion can do is point us in the right direction. Good religion, healthy religion, will point us in the right direction. Good religion, healthy religion, sets us on the path of wisdom, path of love, the path of compassion, the path of justice. In Acts 9:2, Luke describes the first disciples of Jesus as those who belong to the way. the way, the path. Healthy religion, transformative religion, puts us on the right path. Dr. Newell tells about his father who suffered from dementia in his final days. And during that time, the people who visited his father the most frequently were Sylvia and Bosch, a Muslim couple. His father's vocation involved helping to provide relief for refugees, working to find them a place to stay, to call home. And years earlier, when this couple had escaped from war-torn Bosnia, his father helped this couple find sanctuary in Canada. And so this couple ever since referred to him as father because he had been so instrumental and central in their birth into freedom and safety. And Dr. Newell says that his father had always been a deeply compassionate man, but he had also been a conservative man. And at the end of the day, he thought that the folks that he helped, who were from many different religious traditions, would be better off if they adopted his Christian beliefs. And Dr. Newell says that even when his father was in his latter stages of dementia, he loved to pray with the people visiting him. And somehow his words would flow when he prayed, even though in ordinary speech he would struggle to find the words. Well, one sunny afternoon, Dr. Newell joined Bosch and Sylvia in their visit with his father. And Dr. Newell asked his father to pray. They were seated in a circle and they joined hands, and his father prayed, "Without you, O God, we would not be, and because of you, we are one family." And Dr. Newell looked up, and he could see tears streaming down the faces of Bosch and Sylvia. They knew they were one family, says Dr. Newell, but they had never heard his father say it. They knew they were one family, but his father had never said it. Why hadn't he said it? His religious ego. That's how Dr. Newell describes it. And he says that his father's religious ego finally collapsed and the barriers came down. And that's wonderful. But wouldn't it have been even better if his father could have shed his religious ego before he ever got dementia? If our religion, if any religion, is going to help change the world for the better, then more of us who are religious, and especially more of us who are Christians, are going to have to shed our attachment to our religious egos. Brother David Steindl-Rast defines faith. By the way, David Steindl-Rast is a wonderful writer I recommend. He's a Benedictine monk. He works with people from all traditions. But he says faith, this is how he defines it, is courageous trust in the mystery of life, life with a capital L. And he says life makes us human. Now I would tweak that too. I would say courageous trust in the mystery of life and love. Capital L, life, capital L, love. Life and love makes us human. And each culture, says Steindl-Rast, each culture, each period of history gives this faith, trust in the mystery of life and love, new expression in beliefs that are determined by historic and cultural circumstances. Beliefs divide, but the faith from which they spring is one and unites. The kind of faith that unites is not the kind that is rooted in the particular beliefs of a particular culture, of a particular religion, but the kind of faith that unites is expressed through trust in and faithfulness to the great love and life, the ultimate reality that we have met in the story of Jesus, but is beyond the story of Jesus and greater than the story of Jesus. Trust in and faithfulness to the great love that is drawing all creation toward ultimate good and inspires us to work for the common good. And maybe we should all reflect on what might happen or what might need to happen in our lives in order for us to get to a place where a faith that unites becomes more important than beliefs which divide.